Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York. Pete Hamill is my guest. The topic, Frank Sinatra. Hamill had a long friendship with Sinatra, and when he died, Pete wrote a tribute, Why Sinatra Matters. The book has been republished in this, the centennial year of Sinatra's birth. Pete, how did you first meet Frank Sinatra?
I was covering a fight for the New York Post in Las Vegas. And Jimmy Cannon, the great sports writer, sports columnist, who I knew from New York, got me at ringside. He said, after you file, he had this wonderful New York accent, after you file, meet us over in the room there, it's over near the end, or whatever it was. So I did, and after I filed, I went down to see Cannon, and there was Sinatra at this table, and Leo Durocher, the former manager of both the Dodgers and the Giants, and Dean Martin, and they had all either come to watch the fight, and were now retiring to the dressing room, and I just joined them, and I had learned already as a reporter, don't talk, listen.
Listen, yeah.
You know.
And what did you hear as you listened?
I don't remember exactly what it was, but it went from about 4 minutes on the fight to, the meaning of life and American middle age,
There were a few adult beverages on the table, I imagine?
Yes, there were.
Okay.
I had not yet given up drinking, but I had almost done it. And I just sat there listening to them, and I liked Sinatra.
What impression were you able, if you were able to form one of him in that short time?
I don't know. I remember there was some conversation about both Cannon and I being high school dropouts, as Sinatra was a high school dropout. Right. So it was a group that included people
similar background,
who had gone a few innings. In spite of, not because. Cannon had gone off and become a very good war correspondent and came back and became a great sports writer. He and I went to the same Jesuit high school, Regis.
Regis, sure.
I lasted 2 years, he lasted 1.
I didn't even get in. I went to Fordham Prep.
Well, then you know what it was like.
Jesuits, sure.
I learned a lot in 2 years, but I didn't realize I'd learned as much as I did until I grew up.
Well, it seems you must have made an impression on Sinatra at that first meeting, because afterwards, when he would come to New York, next time he came to New York, perhaps, he would call you.
Yeah, I became one of his New York friends. I never went out and stayed at his house. He never certainly came and stayed at mine. But he would call, if he was doing a series of concerts or a big show of some kind. And he'd call usually around 11:30 and say, "Did you eat yet?"
At night, we're talking.
And then off I'd go, and there was always a group, because I think Sinatra, as a boy, was an only child.
Right. At a time when early in the century, at a time when immigrants, families like his were having
or like mine.
Loads of
I was
children.
the oldest of 7,
Sure.
which was normal
Right.
for working class ethnic types at the time. And so he recognized that somehow. I think Cannon brought it up at a late night table, and we started talking about education
Right.
for a while. And Sinatra was also most of his ink, his publicity, never got into this, but he was a reader because he was a guy who had trouble sleeping at night, which was also true of Cannon.
And insomnia.
So they would sometimes, the Insomniacs Anonymous, would call each other at 3 o'clock in the morning and talk about what they would read. You know, it was Cannon, for example, who told Sinatra about this book written by Nelson Algren called The Man with the Golden Arm,
Yeah.
which became one of Sinatra's best movies.
Right.
So they did care about certain things that most, you know.
I don't think that's in the public consciousness
No.
about Sinatra, that he was a
that he was a reader.
that he
yeah.
that he thought about things like
Yeah.
in that way.
No, and yet not surprising once you got to know him. You know, if you got to know him a little bit, you'd understand that as a essentially self-educated man, he was looking for certain things. He was looking for meaning. He was looking for location. How do I fit into this tale? Particularly after he became an almost legendary figure after the great comeback in the years after the war.
Right. In the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, after Ava Gardner.
Right. I'm wondering, just for a moment, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say Sinatra didn't care for or get along too well with reporters, with newspapermen. And yet you talk about a friendship with you,
And
Jimmy
with Cannon. And later on with Sidney Zion, who he liked very much because he was from Jersey,
Yeah.
Sidney. So there was a kind of...
What do you think he saw in you that allowed him, I guess, to trust you?
You know, it's hard to say that. I think he realized that he could say or do certain things in my presence that were not going to end up in the paper the next day. My ambition in life was not to be Lee Mortimer. I wanted to be the best I could be in the only life I was ever going to have.
Lee
The
Mortimer
be-
was one of the most reviled
Yeah.
columnists in Hollywood.
Yeah, he was the guy that was in the Daily Mirror on Walter Winchell's day off. You know, and his mentality reflected that. I didn't know him at all, but I read the column. And Lee Mortimer was famously belted in the mouth by Sinatra at one point. So there was something that brought out the Hoboken street kid
In him.
in
Well, the book is called Why Sinatra Matters, and why he matters, I think most of all, obviously, is the music. What did you hear in the music?
When I first heard it, which was immediately after the war, when I was 10 the year the war ended, when I began to hear Sinatra on Martin Block on the radio,
WNEW.
I could not define why I liked it. And I could not define why I preferred it to Bing Crosby. Even though my father was a huge Bing Crosby fan,
Sure.
as an Irish American, I was naturalized American. But later I began to understand it better. Sinatra was urban. It was a city music, the way he did it, the way he created a language of human emotion. He also had learned from Billie Holiday, born in the same year as he was, from her music, that you could take the music written by someone else, by Rodgers and Hart or one of the Gershwins and whoever it was, and turn it into autobiography by the directness of the emotional commitment to those words. And that was, for a young kid, in an era when working class kids were taught not to express emotion, not to show feeling, you know, that there was a way that you could express feeling and be a man too. There was a way to do that. And he changed that for Americans, particularly city Americans.
You talk about the turning lyrics into autobiography. One gets the feeling of listening to Sinatra, much of his music, that it's a conversation between you and him, or it's a conversation he's having with his
true.
emotions.
That's true, and it's as unscripted as a conversation. In other words, you can't have a conversation if you got the notes in your back pocket. But so even though he took these words of songs written, what we now call the Great American Songbook, the classical pop music of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, he delivered it as if it was written the afternoon before, and that he had something to do with writing it, which he almost never did. And that was an extraordinary shift in our music. But I think there were also the other things that he changed in such important ways. The nature of an Italian American. You know, he was not the organ grinder with the monkey coming down Mulberry Street begging for nickels. He wasn't that. You know, he was a son of those streets. He had come off those streets. And so he changed he along with Fiorello LaGuardia and Joe DiMaggio, were the other contemporaries at the time, were a different kind of Italian American. It was not the immigrant off the boat who couldn't read his own name. It was a guy off the street as hip and knowing about those streets as anybody in the city. And I think that was a huge shift that went beyond the music. Could not have happened without the music, but it moved it past it. So moved the consciousness of the country past just the music into something larger.
He was fiercely proud of his heritage, and I think at one point, wasn't it Harry James wanted him to change his name?
Yes.
To Frankie Satin, and Sinatra was having none of that. He said, "It's Sinatra. I'm Frank Sinatra."
Yeah.
And Harry James backed down.
Yeah. And it was a crucial moment because he was not pretending to be somebody. He was saying, I am somebody. You know, it was a moment, I think, in the formation of his adult character, because he was only, 21 or something, 22, when the Harry James thing
Yeah.
happened. And Harry James ended up respecting him for it because he insisted that his name was, as he said, Frank blank blank Sinatra.
Yeah. That's the way he said it. It's Frank, fill in the blank,
Yeah,
in Sinatra.
yeah.
Do you think we'd be sitting here talking today if we were talking about the music of Frankie Satin? I can't imagine that.
No, no.
I can't imagine that. You mentioned he's an only child, unusual for immigrant families, and there seemed to be a loneliness
Yes.
about him. You can hear it in so much of his music.
Yeah, even when he remembers, he's several times told the story of how when he was growing up in Hoboken, he would take walks down to the water and could look and see the skyline of New York and think, I can do that. I can do that. He had no one to talk to, no older brother, no, younger cousin or anything that he could share. That kind of vision of himself. I hate the notion of the phrase American dream, because dreams are unwilled. But certainly what Sinatra and the best of all the immigrants have done is envision something that through will and work and sacrifice they made real. And Sinatra made it real. I mean, that's why the only reason I get into two of the women,
Nancy and
Ava Gardner,
Ava.
they affected the music. And Nancy would say, you can do this, Frank.
First wife.
Yeah, first wife. So she shared the vision that he was more than just a skinny malink from Hoboken. He had some larger vision of himself.
And Ava certainly affected the music, as I guess it was Nelson Riddle said of her. She taught him how to sing a torch song,
Yeah.
and the hard way.
And I'll tell you, years later, I think it was 13, 14 years after they divorced, I interviewed Ava Gardner. She was in New York. And I went to visit her at like 11 o'clock in the morning one morning. And she was staying in Frank Sinatra's apartment at the Waldorf Astoria. So that was a friendship that had endured a lot of pain, but was still, in some ways, meaningful to Frank. He never spoke about it. He never certainly said anything embarrassing to the other people in his life. But he was still friends with this woman, beautiful as she was, who loved him in some way as he loved her, but it was one of those things that does not work,
Let's talk about the music in terms of some of the themes you've been touching on: loneliness,
resilience, the stoic sort of thing, don't worry about me, I'll get along.
Yeah.
That was a note that hadn't been sounded before by male singers. It said, yes, we had a great time, but it's over, and I'm going to go look for a cab now.
You knocked me down, but
yeah,
I'm getting up.
yeah, I'm from people that get up.
Yeah. Well, there's so much of that in the early the Nelson Riddle years in those songs.
Yeah. For me, those are my favorites, and because I think there's something that Riddle got about Sinatra, both his voice and his emotional power, that nobody had quite located before. And
What are some of those songs that stand from that? We're talking the
my favorite
early middle
now,
50s.
Now that I'm 80, my favorite is "You Make Me Feel So Young." But there was the more you listen to them, you find layers of emotion. Sometimes it can be casual. Sometimes it's never full of contempt. You know, he might break up with a woman, or she break up with him, and regret it. But he never attacks her. He never says, "You bitch, I'm gonna have a life." He steps back and in a kind of wounded way, but remains an individual without callous around his heart.
Do you have some favorite songs or albums?
I like the Wee Small Hours album. I like the Bossa Nova, the Jobim album.
Yeah, Jobim.
Jobim.
Wee Small Hours is, many musicologists have referred to it as perhaps the best album
But
collection ever.
when he does the light stuff, Tony, the up-tempo stuff, the celebratory kind of pieces, he's also wonderful. There's a kind of exuberance in it. So I like Nice and Easy, the album.
Yeah.
You know, because he was lucky that when he started that phase of his career, the LP was beginning to form, so you could have a kind of unity of theme.
Right. Concept albums.
Yeah.
I mean, he sort of
Yeah.
invented them. Or
Yeah. And you can still play them at 2 o'clock in the morning if you can't sleep.
He asked you to write his bio.
He did.
And you agreed, but it didn't work out.
I sort of agreed. I started to talk with him about it, you know, and about different. I said, you know, there's certain things would have to be in it, because I didn't want to just rent out my fingers.
What certain things? The women?
Yeah, the women, the mob, the losses, because we all get through life with a certain number of losses.
What did he say about what you felt had to be in
He said, the women, I love them all. He said, the things that happen at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can't get around it. But there's certain things, if I said anything, someone will come knocking at my door. But then the next day, he called me and he said, meaning the mob guys.
Right.
The next day he called me and said, what the hell? Oh, most of them were all dead. By then, Luciano was dead, and, you know, various guys that he knew when he was young. But his explanation of the mob thing was that when he was a young singer, he was a saloon singer. And he said to me, he said, I didn't meet any Nobel Prize winners in those saloons.
Pete, the last page of your book is very moving. Would you read that for us?
We were crossing 86th Street, heading for Central Park. You think some people are smart, and they turn out dumb, Sinatra said. You think they're straight, they turn out crooked. This was the Watergate winter. The year before, Sinatra, the old Democrat, sat in an honored place at the second inauguration of Richard Nixon. The Watergate tapes would reveal a Nixon who retailed crude anti-Italian slurs. You like people, Sinatra said softly, and they die on you. I go to too many goddamn funerals these days. And women, he said, exhaling and then chuckling again. I don't know what the hell to make of them. Do you? I said that every day I knew less. Maybe that's what it's all about, he said. Maybe all that happens is you get older and you know less. I liked the man who talked that way on a chilly night in New York. I liked his doubt and his uncertainty. He had enriched my life with his music since I was a boy. He had confronted bigotry and changed the way many people thought about the children of immigrants. He had made many of us wiser about loss and human loneliness. And he was still trying to understand what it was all about. His imperfections were upsetting. His cruelties were unforgivable. But Frank Sinatra was a genuine artist, and his work will endure as long as men and women can hear and ponder and feel. In the end, that's all that truly matters.
Why Sinatra Matters. Nice to have it republished. Was a bestseller before.
Yeah.
Maybe will be again.
Yeah.
And I thank you for taking this time to share your friendship.
Thanks for stopping by, man.
We will see you again next week with
Okay.
other topics.
Okay.
Pete Hamill and Frank Sinatra both came of age on city streets. Hamill's writing and Sinatra's songs give the American city a voice. We will hear that voice always. Hope you'll join us next week.